Okay, so let's look at crafting and designing a good research question. This is something that we get asked a lot about in the library. How do I come up with a good topic? How do I ask a good question? And how do I base that on the materials that are available in the library instead of hunting around looking for information about something that either doesn't exist or is exists in a different form and is difficult to turn into a good research paper. So this is just some advice. This isn't a step by step or anything that you have to follow. This is just something that I've found to be helpful over the years, and so hopefully it helps you. Okay, so what we need to begin with then is some sort of seed or source of inspiration. We can't just pluck these things out of nowhere, and often, students are looking for something that's going to be relatively easy to research. But really, my advice is often that the best research topics are going to be ones that you're interested in, things that you don't mind focusing on or that you're going to feel inspired by over the long term, so that you'll actually work on these things and not just want to abandon them halfway through because it's getting boring or tedious. So finding a good source of inspiration and a good kind of seed is going to be a great first step. So here's some places where you can look for inspiration if you're feeling lost and don't know where to begin. So first and most obviously probably is within the course. So something like your course outline or the textbook that's assigned or some of the assigned readings for the course can indicate to you the different themes or different things that are going to be relevant to the course, but also might jump out at you as being particularly interesting. So if there's like a week or a particular class that covers a topic that you feel most inspired by, you could even think back to, the moment when you decided to take the course. What were some of the aspects of the course or the description of the course that jumped out at you as being interesting or important and that inspired you to take the class? That might be helpful. And then within the textbook, you don't want to take the entire textbook. Usually that's going to be far too broad a topic. But if you look at kind of the different chapters or even the different headings or sections within the chapters, that might give you some indication of the different kind of themes or aspects of that broader topic that might be good starting points for your initial research. So that might sound a little bit obvious, but that's a great place to start, is looking at the course content and the stuff that inspires you there. Now, stepping outside the course, this is where we start to get into things that might just be more personally interesting. And this, as I say, are the things that are going to be most inspiring and be able to retain your attention and your motivation over the long term of a project. So thinking about some of these aspects, I think, is good advice. So the example that I'm going to actually pursue today is a look at popular culture. A particular piece of media that I've enjoyed recently, but this can be anything. That doesn't have to be a television show or a movie, but there might be a television show or something or a movie that you've enjoyed recently. And even if we're not studying that media object, like writing a paper about that particular TV show or that particular movie, there might be sort of themes or plot lines or things that might be inspiring or might help you to ask questions about, is that really a true reflection of how things are? Is there sort of a political issue there or a social issue that might be important to the plot of that film or TV show? And then you can use that again as the sort of starting point or the initial seed of your interest in that topic. So the example that I have that I'm going to use today, once I go through these other sources of inspiration, we're going to talk about a TV show that I watched, or a Netflix show that I watched, called Man on the Inside. It stars Ted Danson, and he's sort of a private eye. He goes undercover in a retirement home. And so, it was an interesting show. I enjoyed it for a variety of reasons. It's both funny and kind of intriguing, but also, that gets me thinking about sort of this idea of sort of crime and detective work and criminology as it relates to the elderly or retirement homes, retirement facilities. So that's kind of, again, just the seed. I have no intention of writing a research paper about that particular show, but it sort of is a certain initial point of inspiration where I can take that and then use that as a way to look into different topics or themes that I might be more interested in. So that's the example we're going to look at a little bit later. Um, Also, always a very good and pervasive source of inspiration might be news or current events. We live within a 24-hour news cycle. There's constantly new information coming up about world events and other things like that. And so you can use that as a starting point for your interest in various topics. If there's things in the news that relate to the subject matter of the course that you're taking and might be directly relevant to the type of research paper that you're writing, that can be great. But it doesn't even have to be sort of these broad world events or major events in the world. It can also be smaller things from your local community. Community newspapers, other things like that might be inspiring or might give you really tangible local problems that you can tackle. And what's nice about that too is that when something is directly connected to your community, you might find that what you learn from the research and the work that you do as a student might actually be able to directly inform the work that you can do in your community. So you can actually take some of the things that you learn from this research and actually bring it and have a tangible effect on the community that you live in, right? So the more kind of local and directly relevant it is to you, the more you're able to actually potentially enact positive change in the world, which is great. Another place that we can look to is social media or YouTube videos or podcasts, looking at kind of influencers and how they approach different topics. Lots of influencers talk about semi-academic topics and might present their views on those things. There's some podcasts will be extensive and will cover certain topics that are related to the academic work that you're doing as a student. What's interesting about this too is that because a lot of the people that create this type of content are not necessarily experts in the fields of study related to those things, right? Certain, YouTube influencers or social media influencers will speak quite outwardly about different topics that they don't really know that much about. And so what this allows you to do then is sort of use that as inspiration, but then take that forward from an academic perspective and actually do the research that those influencers didn't do, right? And kind of debunk or fact check some of the information that they're presenting in their work. And that can be really interesting too. And it's a really good exercise in media literacy. Take these very perhaps sensationalized approaches of influencers on social media and kind of bring it into the academic world and say, well, let's look at this from an academic perspective and see, does the science actually back this up? And that's an exercise that will help you in the future, not just with this assignment, but also going forward, being able to think critically about the information that you're absorbing through social media and other online venues. The final source of inspiration that I have here has to do with, just chatting with the people in your life, right? So we have direct life experiences that sometimes can inform, important questions about how the world works. And so looking at the world around you or the experiences that you're having, but also, through those conversations with family and friends, you can sort of determine what your interests are or be inspired by their passions and take some of those topics forwards as well. So if you have a good conversation with someone at a party or something, maybe that's kind of the initial seed of a research question that you can look into in more detail. So, this is, it's not just like we've got life and we've got school. There's overlap between those two things. And, it's our hope as people at the university, people, librarians, instructors, all the people that work at the university, it's our hope that the things that students learn and take away from their university experience help them in their life and help to enrich their life experience. So this is the way that this can be kind of conversational between your personal life and the work that you're doing as a student. Okay, considering all of those, I'm just going to use the one example that I have. That TV show Man on the Inside that I watched, was very interesting. It's sort of about, like I said, a private investigator who goes undercover at a retirement home to try and solve a crime. right? And so that's my initial kind of inspiration, this idea of like, what is the relationship between crime and criminal activity, as it relates to retirement homes or the elderly or senior citizens, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to just begin very broad, or what I did anyway, was I looked for just an encyclopedia to try and see if there's some kind of interconnection between these different concepts or what has been written. I know absolutely nothing about this topic, so let's begin at the beginning and just look for an encyclopedia that's going to kind of put these things in context for me. So what I did was I searched the library for encyclopedia crime. That's going to bring up occurrences of encyclopedia and crime, probably in the title of the works that I find. And I didn't have to scroll very far. My fourth result here was the Encyclopedia of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Now, I think one of the reasons that I chose this is because it's an ebook. So I could just click to view ebook, open this up. I can search within it. It's very easy to use. But there might be instances where I would want to use something that's available in the library. I would come in, do something similar, find the encyclopedia, and then flip through the pages to find the relevant sections that I'm looking for. So in this case, I use this ebook. There's the option to search within the book. So I searched for the word elderly. I could have developed this a lot more. I could have included senior citizens. I could have included different language or tried multiple searches. I just wanted to kind of quickly get a grasp of what within this encyclopedia of crime and criminal justice, where are we mentioning elderly people? So I found this one entry for fraud victimization that kind of jumped out at me. There were quite a few different ones that I could have latched onto, but this was the one that jumped out at me initially, was this reference to fraud victimization. So this isn't an article that's all about the elderly and their connection to crime. It's looking at a specific type of crime, and presumably somewhere within that article, it's going to mention the elderly. So I went to that article, I scrolled through it or kind of scanned it to see what kind of interesting things might come up. And then I searched on the page for the word elderly, and this is the section that I found. Now, where this is helpful is not because this is giving me any deep answers to any kind of research question, but it's going to kind of give me some indications of where there might be some interesting aspects of this topic as it relates to the elderly and as it relates to my initial interests. Right. So here, it's talking a lot about how there's a lot of research related to college students, but it says less is known about fraud targeting and fraud victimization at the other end of the age distribution, the elderly. So that's where it found the word that I was looking for. So what this means for me is that the authors of this encyclopedia article are basically proposing that there's a gap in the literature, or there's some type of sort of lapse in the research where we don't know as much as we probably should about the connection between fraud victimization and the elderly. So this is a good sign, even though it might sort of seem like that presents a challenge. If there's not a lot written about something, it might be hard to do research on it. But what this is telling me is that there's potentially a gap in the literature where research that I do might be able to fill in that gap, or sort of see what's available to sort of fill that gap. So, this is a good thing. It's telling us that this is an interesting topic. There is some motivation on the part of researchers to learn more about this, but we don't have like a super clear final point on this. And that means that it's an interesting topic that I can explore in a paper. So another way that I can sort of begin to do this preliminary research is to look for books, right? So that was an encyclopedia article. It's sort of it's framing my topic in the context of the entire discipline of criminology. This here is a book that's looking specifically at elders, crime, and the criminal justice system. So I found this by searching for the words crime and then a variety of different terms that might refer to the elderly. So elderly or older people or senior citizens or retirees or retirement homes. I forget all the terms that I searched, but basically opening it up to a whole bunch of different synonyms for the elderly and then overlaying that with the theme of crime, right? So I found this book here about elders, crime, and the criminal justice system, myths, perceptions, and reality in the 21st century. Again, this is an ebook, so I can open it directly in my browser. I found this second chapter here of this book called Elders as Victims of Crime, Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation. And so this would again perhaps form the basis of my initial understanding of how elderly people are being victimized or being targeted for crime, right? All of this being very preliminary, it's just meant to help me to wrap my head around the different aspects that I might explore in more detail. And then once I know what elements of this topic I want to focus on, then I can come back to the library search and do a kind of deeper dive into that particular aspect to find out more in terms of what the academic literature says, find some journal articles and things that are really focused on that topic specifically. Yeah, so this is how I developed my preliminary search strategy, is picking out these different elements. So I had fraud targeting or fraud victimization as my large category of criminal activity, and elderly or older people or senior citizens or retirement homes. Now, these were my choices. This is how I chose to develop this topic. Another person doing the very same research project is going to take this in a completely different direction. So this is just based on my choices and my interests. This isn't to say this is the right topic to explore when it comes to crime in the elderly, but this is the direction that I went when I was doing this research. Now, at a certain point, I'll have to kind of commit to this, but this is still at a preliminary stage. Right now, I can still kind of keep things a bit loose, but yeah, at a certain point, it's very important to commit. So this is what I chose for this example, is to kind of explore this way. So just through my preliminary research, I was then able to pick out some different themes, because not every article or book or source that I found is coming at this from exactly the same angle, right? And so by kind of glancing through these, maybe reading some abstracts or looking at the introductions and conclusions of some of these articles, I was able to identify a few themes that might either be worth looking at individually or might form sort of one section of a research paper about a broader topic, right? So some of the ones that I identified just very quickly can talk about, the vulnerability of the elderly to fraud. So what are the kind of characteristics that make the elderly particularly vulnerable? Why are they the ones that are getting targeted more specifically? Is that even true? The psychological aspects. So I found one article that suggests it's kind of an overview of the psychology of fraud victimization of the elderly. So what is that experience like for the elderly as they are being victimized through the internet? And potentially what are some of the motivations maybe for targeting the elderly specifically? What are the different types of fraud? So there's a few different categories of fraud that I might focus on. So there's financial, consumer, shopping, internet, health fraud, etc. There's different kind of fairly broad categories that I might either use as different sections of a paper, again, more broadly about fraud, or that I might focus on exclusively, right? So looking at health fraud, specifically health fraud for the elderly via the internet, that kind of thing might be like a good sort of way to focus and set the scope of my research so that I'm not overwhelmed by too much or not sort of underwhelmed by too little. And then the last sort of theme that I identified was strategies to combat fraud. So what are some ways to improve situations for the elderly so that they're not so vulnerable to fraud? So, these were just things that came out, popped out to me, but it's ways of taking this, first off, this initial kind of seed topic of crime in the elderly and kind of whittling that down further and further till I've got this strong point of focus. Once I know kind of what angle or what angles I'm going to take, then searching the library becomes much easier and finding sources that are relevant becomes easier once I know precisely what it is I'm looking for. Whereas when I'm searching for crime in the elderly, I'm getting a huge number of results and they're all kind of about different things. It's hard to kind of know exactly, what it is that I'm going to research and write about. Okay, so for each of these, I can then adapt my search strategy, right? So if I wanted to focus on particular themes, I can then recenter my search on any one of these themes and choose to use, one of them exclusively, as I said, or some combination of these different themes as the different aspects that I focus on in my paper, right? So this is just to quickly go through these, something like the types of fraud. I mentioned health fraud, so I could then focus on that. So health fraud and elderly or older people or senior citizens or retirement homes. There I can see, specifically this type of fraud as it relates to the age group that I'm looking at, right? And so once I have these points of focus, I can adjust my search strategy to focus on those things. So this is kind of, broadly speaking, this is the process that you'll want to go through, especially if you're starting at the very beginning with no real clear idea of what it is that you're researching. Then you can begin broad and kind of focus it down, filtering as you go and kind of attaining this reasonable focus so that you have something more pointed to focus on. So here are just the key takeaways that I think are important from this video. So, don't expect to choose your topic just out of thin air. Don't, wait for inspiration to strike, although it might, and that can be a wonderful experience too when you're just like, aha, that's what I'll focus on. But usually it means kind of beginning in some sort of broad category, looking at some encyclopedia articles, or looking at your course outlines, or finding some media object or something in your life that inspires you that's related to the course content, and at least starting there and kind of finding ways to process that into something usable. Begin with an area of interest and start your preliminary research that way. Don't feel like you have to first pick your research question, and only once that's decided can you begin your research. There's a whole bunch of activities of preliminary research that you can do that are super valuable and then get you kind of rolling and get you moving towards some of your goals. You don't have to begin with the perfect question before you start your research. Use sort of sources of background information to figure out within this kind of area of interest, what are the major themes or subtopics that people are writing about or exploring, or if there's not a lot of that, where are the gaps, where are the things that we could know more, but we don't, and then maybe you can fill that void with your own research. Stay flexible, be adaptable through the process. So don't, commit too early. Try and give yourself room to sort of pivot and move about across, different potential angles or different potential pathways into the research. So keep yourself flexible. Then at some point, once you've done some good preliminary research, choose one or more areas of focus and then redo your kind of search activities or refocus your search activities onto those areas of focus to see, okay, now that I've kind of picked a few different themes, what then did the literature say about those things? And once you've done that, you're moving in the right direction of a good research question. Out of that, you're going to probably find that there's either gaps or suggestions in the literature for areas of further research that then you can use as kind of your guiding research questions, or maybe taking all of the sources that you found together, you might sort of discover that they're all kind of pointing to or addressing a certain broad question that then you can examine and sort of draw together these sources to help you find, if not an answer to the question, then at least a way to address that research question adequately to write a research paper. So that is a very quick summary, kind of the recommendations that I have anyway for developing your research questions and you're developing your topics and kind of refining your ideas so that when it comes time to actually do a lot of reading and writing about a particular topic, that you're ready and you have kind of a clear idea of how to take that forward. So hopefully that's helpful. As always, if you have questions about these or any other aspects of library research, feel free to get in touch with the library, either by coming into the library or through our website. You can get in contact with us, and we're always happy to help you out. So please get in touch with us if you have questions, and we'll do our best to help you. All right. Bye-bye.